My name is Julia, and I never thought I'd be the kind of person to air out my family drama online, but after what happened in Denver last weekend, I realized my story isn't just mine. It's a warning. For years, I've prided myself on keeping the peace, on biting my tongue when family arguments flared. But last Saturday, during what was supposed to be a simple dinner after golf, I said something that detonated like a bomb in my sister's marriage. My brother-in-law, Colin, has been griping endlessly about the lack of intimacy with my sister Marie, and after hearing both sides, I thought I understood the problem. But when I suggested out loud that maybe helping around the house could fix things, all hell broke loose. I'm 42, married to my husband David, also 42, and together we've built a marriage grounded in teamwork and quiet dependability. My younger sister Marie, 40, has always been more than just family. She's my best friend, the person I call when life feels too heavy or too light. Marie's husband, Colin, 41, has been part of our lives for over a decade, long enough for his quirks to feel like permanent fixtures at family gatherings. They have 2 kids, sweet and full of energy, who keep Marie on her toes every waking moment. On the outside, we look like the model of family closeness. Joint vacations, birthday parties planned together, even cabins near each other so our kids could grow up side by side. But beneath that polished picture, cracks have been widening. Colin is charming, athletic, and endlessly talkative, the kind of man who loves the spotlight at every barbecue or holiday dinner. Marie, meanwhile, carries the heavier, invisible load, the meal prep, school runs, laundry, and emotional labor. That never gets mentioned. David and I often tease that she married the fun sibling while I married the reliable one. But I've learned something she hasn't yet. Fun fades, but reliability builds intimacy. Until recently, I never questioned Colin and Marie's marriage. To the outside world, they looked perfectly functional, even enviable at times. Colin was the outgoing one, the kind of guy who could strike up a conversation with a stranger at the grocery store and leave with a new friend. At family gatherings, he was always in the thick of things, telling stories, making people laugh, pouring drinks. People gravitated toward him. Marie, on the other hand, had a quieter presence. She was the one who made sure the kids had snacks, packed, the table was set, and the laundry got done in between hosting duties. She'd slip away to the kitchen while Colin held court in the living room, and to most people, it probably just looked like teamwork. But I noticed the way her shoulders slumped when she thought no one was watching, the fatigue written across her face even as she smiled. David and I had our share of struggles too. Stress from work, money worries, the chaos of raising kids. But we always circled back to the same rhythm. He never needed to be asked to help. He just did. Whether it was washing dishes after a long day or folding laundry while we watched TV, he carried the weight with me. And that made intimacy easier, more natural. Love wasn't about grand gestures. It was about showing up in the small, daily moments. So when Colin began grumbling about the lack of intimacy in his marriage, I assumed it was just a phase, a dry spell, something that would work itself out. I never imagined it would escalate into a confrontation so raw and public that it left Marie's marriage fractured, and me standing in the wreckage, wondering if I had crossed a line. The first real cracks showed during a golf outing. David came home looking irritated, dropping his bag by the door with more force than usual. When I asked what was wrong, he shook his head and muttered, "Colin wouldn't shut up about Marie. Every hole." It was the same rant about how she never wants sex anymore. I swear, it was exhausting. I was stunned, not so much by the complaint itself, but by the sheer audacity of making his wife's private struggles locker room fodder, broadcasting marital frustrations to whoever would listen on a golf course. It wasn't just disrespectful, it was childish. Later that afternoon, while our kids ran circles around the yard, I sat with Marie on the porch swing. I carefully asked if everything was all right between her and Colin. She gave me a tired smile, then rolled her eyes. "He doesn't lift a finger around here," she admitted. "By the time I've cooked, cleaned, wrangled the kids, packed lunches, and paid bills, I'm spent. I just want to read for 20 minutes before bed, not entertain him." Her words hit me like a weight. This wasn't about passion fading. It wasn't about love gone cold. It was about energy, fairness, and the crushing loneliness of carrying a load alone. Intimacy wasn't the problem. Equity was. That evening, the four of us sat down for what should have been a peaceful family dinner. David, ever the dependable partner, had gone out of his way to make it special. He ordered takeout from Marie's favorite spot, swung by the bakery to grab dessert, and even picked up a bottle of wine he knew I loved. By the time he came through the door, arms full and smiling, the kids were bouncing off the walls, and Marie and I were setting the table. Colin, meanwhile, lounged in his chair scrolling through his phone, oblivious to the chaos around him. Dinner itself went smoothly enough. The kids chattered, David cracked a few jokes, and Marie's shoulders relaxed for the first time that day. But as soon as the plates were empty, the shift happened. Without hesitation, David stood, gathered dishes, and waved Marie and me back into our seats. "We've got this," he said, nodding toward Colin. "We golfed all day. You two deserve a break." It was such a small gesture, yet so meaningful, an acknowledgement of the unseen labor Marie and I carried. Colin barely lifted his eyes from his phone. When David nudged him with a grin and said, "Come on, man, let's clear this," Colin muttered something about needing fresh air and started toward the door. That's when something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the wine. Maybe it was years of watching Marie silently shoulder the burden. Or maybe it was the stark contrast between my husband's partnership and Colin's indifference. Before I could stop myself, I blurted, "Colin, maybe if you helped clear the table once in a while, Marie might actually be in the mood later." The room went still. Forks froze midair. Marie's eyes widened. Colin stopped at the door, his face flushing dark red as he turned toward me. I knew I had crossed a line, but I also knew I had finally said aloud the truth my sister had been swallowing for years. What made it sting even more was that this confrontation wasn't just between the adults. The kids were still at the table, innocently eating, oblivious to the brewing storm. My words landed like a grenade. Colin's face flushed crimson, and the room fell silent. The only sound the soft clinking of dishes as David continued clearing, trying to ease the tension. "Excuse me?" Colin's voice cracked, sharp and defensive. My heart raced, but I didn't falter. "You want intimacy, but you refuse to contribute," I said firmly. "It doesn't work like that." Marie's eyes darted between us, a mix of relief and horror written across her face. The kids looked around nervously, sensing the gravity of the moment even if they didn't understand all the details. And Colin, he wasn't just being called out, he was being exposed. His pattern of neglect, the refusal to participate in the household and support his wife, was laid bare in front of his family. For a man like Colin, who thrived on appearances and reputation, this public reckoning hit harder than any private argument ever could. Pride and image mattered to him, and in that moment, both were crumbling under the weight of truth. That night, after the kids were tucked into bed, the house felt like a pressure cooker, thick with tension and unspoken words. Colin retreated to the den, his shoulders slumped, scrolling aimlessly on his phone, muttering under his breath every so often. Marie sat quietly on the couch with a glass of wine, her expression unreadable, and I lay awake, replaying the evening in my mind. Every word I'd spoken echoed back, louder and sharper than I'd intended. I knew I had voiced what Marie had silently carried for years. The exhaustion, the frustration, the longing for a partnership that felt equal. But did that make it my place to speak? The guilt gnawed at me relentlessly. I hadn't just shared a truth, I'd hurled it like a dagger, and it had landed in wounds already festering beneath the surface. David tried to reassure me, insisting that Colin needed this wake-up call, that sometimes a jolt was necessary for change. But I wasn't so certain. I didn't just feel like I'd embarrassed Colin. I felt as though I'd pulled Marie's private struggle into the spotlight without her consent, forcing her to confront it publicly, exposing her vulnerability in a way she hadn't chosen. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on me, tangled with a strange relief that the truth was finally out, yet haunted by the ripple effects I couldn't yet predict. By the time sleep finally came, it was uneasy and fitful, filled with questions of loyalty, intervention, and whether doing the right thing sometimes comes at too high a personal and familial cost. I didn't set out to humiliate Colin. My goal wasn't revenge, it was accountability, though I'll admit that after hearing him complain about intimacy, while doing nothing to help at home, my patience had frayed to its limit. The word revenge makes it sound malicious, but in reality, what I wanted was clarity. If Colin wanted to treat marriage as a transaction, giving love without effort, then I would strip away his excuses and make him face the truth. I thought about timing, tone, and audience. This wasn't a confrontation for just the two of us. It had to be undeniable. Everyone present needed to see the imbalance, to recognize that intimacy doesn't exist in a vacuum. It grows from shared effort, respect, and partnership. Marie had carried the weight of silence long enough, balancing bills, meals, and kids while absorbing complaints that weren't hers to bear. In my mind, the plan was simple. Connect the dots out loud, clearly and firmly. Let him squirm if he had to, but let the lesson stick. If embarrassment came as a side effect, so be it. My intention wasn't to shame him publicly for sport. It was to hold him accountable for years of neglecting the most basic expectations of a partnership. Rehearse the phrasing in my head, balancing blunt honesty with careful reasoning. I didn't want a shouting match. I wanted an undeniable reflection of reality. Maybe my words would spark change, or maybe they would ignite a storm. Either way, I knew one thing. The scales had been tipped for too long, and it was time someone leveled them. When I spoke at the dinner table, it wasn't rehearsed. It was instinct. But the words carried the weight of years spent watching Marie carry the invisible labor while Colin's complaints about intimacy went unexamined. His face twisted first in disbelief, then in rage. He slammed a hand on the chair and barked, "So what, you're saying I should do chores to earn sex? That's disgusting." I stayed calm. "I'm not talking about earning anything," I said evenly. "I'm talking about partnership. Marie isn't withholding affection, she's exhausted. You want connection, you need to contribute." David nodded silently beside me, stacking dishes with quiet precision, demonstrating the kind of shared responsibility Colin refused to consider. Colin scoffed, his voice rising. "You're meddling. This isn't your business." He jabbed finger at David. "What, you think she's gonna blow you tonight just because you did the dishes?" The absurdity of it hung in the air like smoke. I leaned in, voice steady but firm. "It's not about the dishes, Colin. It's about respect, attention, and mutual effort. Affection grows in a house where labor is shared, not in one where it's all on her shoulders." For the first time, the room went quiet. Even the kids sensed the tension, their chatter fading. Colin's anger simmered, but my words landed in a way no joke or excuse could deflect. David's calm presence, paired with my blunt honesty, reflected a truth Colin couldn't hide from. Intimacy is a two-way street, and neglecting your part has consequences. Sometimes immediate, sometimes painfully visible. The confrontation wasn't about revenge or humiliation for sport. It was the moment the scales of responsibility tipped, the moment someone finally voiced what had been obvious to everyone but him. Colin's storm of words and disbelief couldn't erase the truth. It could only underline it. Colin didn't just react. He detonated. His face reddened, hands gesturing wildly as he launched into a tirade about being unappreciated, overworked, and unfairly burdened. "I work all day. I deserve to relax when I get home," he shouted. "And now you're all ganging up on me? This is ridiculous." He accused me of meddling, of twisting Marie's words, of turning everyone against him. "You're making me look like a fool," he barked, pointing between me and David. "In front of our kids? How could you?" His voice cracked with frustration and pride, a storm that seemed impossible to calm. In a dramatic flourish, he snatched his keys and stormed out, slamming the front door so hard the windows rattled. The echoes of his departure lingered in this quiet house. Marie sat frozen, eyes wide, pale and trembling. Upstairs, the kids whispered nervously, unsure what had just unfolded. Hours later, Colin returned, but the confrontation had left a mark deeper than any apology could erase. He moved through the house like a shadow, avoiding Marie, barely acknowledging David or me. The silence he imposed was heavy, calculated, a weaponized punishment that spoke louder than words ever could. I watched Marie struggle to reconcile relief, gratitude, and guilt. The room's tension hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. Colin's pride had been wounded, and instead of reflection or change, he chose withdrawal, letting resentment and avoidance fill the space that partnership and intimacy had once occupied. The damage wasn't just in the words spoken at the table, it was in the silence that followed, a lingering reminder of the confrontation's cost. In the days that followed, the house felt heavy, like a fog refusing to lift. Marie confided that Colin hadn't spoken to her since the confrontation. It wasn't dramatic yelling, just an oppressive silence, but it carried more weight than any argument could. Every glance, every small gesture became a reminder of the tension that now defined their home. Marie admitted she felt torn. Part of her was grateful. I had voiced what she'd been swallowing for years. But another part feared my words had driven a wedge deeper into their already strained marriage. I wrestled with my own feelings of guilt. I wondered if I'd overstepped, if my bluntness had done more harm than good. I thought about apologizing to Colin, explaining my intentions, softening my approach. But each time I considered it, I hesitated. Colin had spent years avoiding responsibility, avoiding shared effort, cloaking neglect in excuses. If a single dinner conversation could unearth his pride and expose the inequity in their partnership, maybe that was exactly what was needed. David was quiet but supportive, offering small reassurances. You spoke the truth. Sometimes truth is uncomfortable. And I began to see it, not as a failure or intrusion, but as a catalyst. The reckoning had begun, whether Colin liked it or not. The silence, icy and deliberate, spoke volumes. Marie felt it. I felt it. And slowly I realized that sometimes a marriage needs more than whispered complaints, compromise, or avoidance. It needs exposure. It needs accountability. And if that meant lingering tension, awkward conversations, and bruised egos, then maybe that was the price of honesty. Looking back, I realized my words weren't just about chores, dinners, or intimacy. They were about respect, equity, and the unspoken labor that sustains a marriage. Relationships aren't built on grand gestures alone. They're built on noticing the exhaustion in your partner's eyes, stepping in without being asked, and sharing the invisible weight that often goes unseen. Every plate cleared, every chore done, every thoughtful action compounds into intimacy, trust, and mutual care. Colin wanted affection without contribution, intimacy without effort, and in doing so, he had been blind to the sacrifices Marie made, daily. My comment may have been blunt, even uncomfortable, but it highlighted a reality that had been ignored for too long. Sometimes the truth feels cruel, but the cruelty of silence, of pretending everything is fine while one partner bears the burden alone, is far worse. If my sister's marriage buckles under the weight of that truth, perhaps it was never as strong as it appeared on the surface. But maybe, just maybe, this reckoning will spark a necessary conversation, a realignment of effort, and a recognition that love is not transactional. It's reciprocal. My role wasn't to punish Colin, it was to hold a mirror up to a problem no one else dared confront. And in that mirror, the reflection wasn't shame, it was accountability, a reminder that partnerships thrive only when both sides contribute, respect, and recognize each other's work. So now I'm left with a knot of guilt, doubt, and a strange sense of satisfaction. Did I overstep? Did I cross a line that should have been left unspoken? Marie hasn't blamed me, but I can see the tension in her eyes, the hesitation in her voice when she talks about the incident, the careful way she navigates conversations around Colin. He, of course, refuses to acknowledge me at all, retreating into silence as if ignoring the problem will make it disappear. And yet, part of me wonders if my words might have planted something important, a seed of awareness he desperately needed. Perhaps it's the spark that will force him to reconsider his role in the partnership, to recognize that love isn't one-sided, and that intimacy is built on mutual effort and respect. Or maybe it has only widened the rift, leaving his marriage more fragile than before. So I turn to you, strangers on the internet, for perspective. AITAH for telling my brother-in-law that helping around the house might actually lead to more intimacy? Or was I simply holding up a mirror to a truth no one else dared confront? Was this accountability, a necessary push, or interference that will have lasting consequences? I can't answer that on my own, but maybe your judgment can help me make sense of what really happened that night and whether my blunt honesty was a gift or a misstep.